Hi everybody. Good evening if you're logging in from India. Good day if you're logging in from anywhere else in the world. Thank you for joining us once again on a Friday for a live conversation. Today's topic, as all of you have seen, is a topic that needs no introduction. It needs no context. It needs no discussion. It is a topic we can dive right into because it is the lived reality of so many of us on a day to day basis. Our inner critic or our propensity for self criticism, the shades and the tones that it takes. And I have with me today Sunanda Pati, who is an embodied art space facilitator and the founder of Gaia Comes to the City. Sunanda, welcome again.
Thank you, Rekha. Pleasure to
I,
be here.
I know you're a familiar face to the audience, but if you would want to introduce yourself and embodied arts based facilitation one more time, just in case there are new people on the live, please do so.
Sure. I'll just probably say a couple of sentences. With embodied arts, what I do is whether it's theater, whether it's movement, whether it's writing, I always use the arts in relation to the way our bodies work. Because finally it's to bring the experiences to the real time and to the real ground, and the ground we are literally walking on. And My belief is that our bodies hold tremendous amounts of wisdom
Yes.
that often our minds are not able to decode or decipher, because we've been around in body for millions and millions of years, even
Mhm.
before our minds became the way they are today.
Mm.
So our bodies know more than our minds do sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think through my work, what I try to do is bring the cognitive parts and the physical parts together to create what I call it psychosomatic wellness.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it is emotional, it's physical, it's mental, it's also spiritual. Though that word I know means different things to different people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sunanda. And I'm glad you deconstructed that a little bit because I think this is very relevant to the topic we're talking about today. The inner critic receives a lot of bad press, a lot of bad press. And we all know about the inner critic. But the thing is, we think about the inner critic as a voice that's constantly speaking in our heads. It's a voice, it's about self talk, it's about criticism. We very rarely talk about all our other senses, the body or the spirit or the other elements of this voice. We just reduce it to us being in our heads. And that is why I am so glad we are going to be talking about the inner critic and unpacking it in the context of everything other than the mind, because the mind is known to us. But before we start, or before we even go down to constructing, I'm going to ask you a question that has been on my mind, which has made me very curious over a lot, quite a bit of time, because the inner critic gets a lot of bad press, like I said. And if all of us women, we are told either override it or ignore it. But we don't really, and we're all, if you ask me, we're all winging it. All of us are winging it in overriding this inner critic or managing this inner critic, right? For me, it's very fundamental. If we have to really make progress, we have to understand the roots of the problem. I don't think we can fix any problem at the surface. And this is why I've always wondered, why do we even develop this critical voice within us? Like, it's obviously something we develop. Why do we develop it? Surely there's a reason, there's a purpose. And what I would like to know from you is your thoughts on why you think we develop it. What is its purpose? What is its reason for being, to put it, in a nutshell?
The way we are organized as a species
Mm-hmm.
into different cultures, no matter which country we belong to, no matter what language we speak, I think the human condition is such that we are always trying to idealize the way we ought to live.
Mm.
There is a lot of idealization, a view towards perfection.
Yeah.
And I think it's at a like, so I will like now that you've asked me the question, I am picturing it as there's a larger circle which you could talk about as, the super consciousness, or what Freud called as the super ego. And
Okay.
then you have the smaller circle, which
Mm-hmm.
is the voice of our families,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
translating what the culture or the society tells us and
Mm.
brings it to the home. And
Mm.
then as children, we hear these things told to us. This
Mm-hmm.
should be this way.
Yeah.
This ought to be like this. This must be like this. And
Mm.
there's a I think there's also what needs to be said here also is that as children, we also slowly develop this innate understanding, maybe
Mm.
subconsciously,
Mm.
that if we listen, we will
Yeah.
be safe. If
Mm.
we conform, we will
Mm.
be safe.
Mm.
So I think it is this idealization on one end,
Mm-hmm.
and this natural sense that, if I listen, I'll be safe. And the two coming together,
Mm.
forming internalized voices. And
Mm.
that's how the inner critic develops.
That's
Is
interesting.
Yeah.
So basically what we are kind of veering towards is it starts off being a friend. It's a friend, it's like a friend inside of us who's keeping us safe, who's telling us that you can do this and you cannot do this at a time in our life when we don't have much power, and that we are dependent on the goodwill, the love, the attention of people who are bigger than us, older than us, and therefore are caring for us. And this voice is actually trying to protect us. But in the process, it tells us, either do things in a particular way or be a particular way, and it keeps regulating us. It's actually meant to be a friend, which in later life becomes, uh, I don't know if we can call it a foe, but it becomes a very limiting mechanism within us. Am I right? Did I get that right?
Partially, yes, Rekha. But I also want to acknowledge that the initial experience of the inner critic might actually not feel like a friend. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's also, when we decode it later,
Mm-hmm.
after maybe a significant healing or whatever, then yes, we can see why it developed in the first place. But I
Mm-hmm.
also want to acknowledge that initially, when we might be experiencing it,
Mm.
it actually comes as an oppressive presence.
Mm. Mm.
So I think
Mm.
we have a whole journey,
Right,
if
right.
we are willing to take that journey, that is. But if we are not willing to take that journey, or for whatever reason we are very overwhelmed by the inner critic,
Mm.
then that journey from being a very tough, we use this phrase tough love,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
actually somehow always reminds me of the inner critic.
I don't
Like,
like to speak up.
yeah, I'm going to beat you up, but I mean well, you know?
Yes,
So,
yes,
so you see
yes,
how there is a correlation there, and how
yes.
these such figures, we actually end up internalizing such figures.
This reminds me of a childhood experience of mine, because in my family, you had to come first in class, or it didn't count at all. It didn't matter even if you came fifth or sixth or seventh in class. And for, I think, till I was in the second grade, I used to be the class topper. And somewhere I think I was this very rebellious person who didn't want to do that. It wasn't just me. And my grades started to slip. And I think by the time I got to the fourth grade or the fifth grade, I was well somewhere between the fifth and the 10th. I'd slid way down. But I was somebody who, I used to read a lot. So I had a lot of common sense and I could connect the dots. And I remember this one day in class when, the teacher was talking about idioms and phrases and figures of speeches. And she asked the class a question and nobody could connect the dots. I was the only person who got it. And at the end of 15 minutes, she let me speak. She didn't let me speak initially. She made the whole class answer and they didn't get it right. And then she said, when I spoke, she said, this kid may not come first in class, but she can connect the dots. She can see what none of you can see and she can connect the dots. And I remember I was so proud. I was so proud of myself. I went home and I told my parents that, you know what happened in class today? This happened and this happened. This is what the teacher said. I expected appreciation. What I got instead was a response which was, but your teacher said you don't come first in class. And in
Mm,
that moment, my victory turned into dust in my mouth. And, I think subconsciously at some point, I always thought, whatever I do other than my studies, even if I'm very happy, it's something I should keep to myself. I don't have to talk
mm,
about it. And as an adult, it's actually very difficult for me still to, it's not just with my parents, with anybody to say, hey, you know what, I'm doing this. Can you please support me? Can you help me? I could very clearly see that pattern from numerous incidents like this from my childhood. So that's why
mm,
I asked whether it was a friend, because for me, it was a friend who just saying, don't tell, because you're going to get hurt.
mm,
Don't tell them about it. Let's just keep this to ourselves.
mm. Yeah, Beyond. No, I hear you. The reason I wanted to acknowledge the oppression is
Yeah,
also because
yeah,
kids can become afraid and then not speak about something. So, of
yeah,
course, I think sometimes it does dawn on
yeah,
us in, slightly more blessed forms, like
yeah,
the one who told you don't tell, but
yeah,
it had a softer quality.
yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's different tones and tonalities. Like sometimes it's scary, sometimes it's softer, sometimes it's kind. But you know what's the most interesting thing? Almost always we talk of the inner critic in two terms, in terms of voice and self-talk.
Mm,
And our popular exploration of the inner critic is uses only two senses, which is us speaking and us hearing. Considering that this plays out entirely in our heads, right? This
mm,
is very interesting because it's us talking to ourselves and it's playing out in our heads, but these are the only two senses from which we look at it.
mm.
I was very curious, since you work with the body, do you think the inner critic manifests in other forms, utilizing other senses, say in the body, say in spirit, at different levels, other than the head and other than just the voice and in the context of hearing?
Absolutely, Rekha, it does. I think it's a great question because I feel it really shows in the body, and
Mm-hmm.
I have both worked with people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my practice as well as discussed it
Mm-hmm.
outside of my work with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Breath. The first thing that I would want to talk about is breath.
Mm,
I have experienced it in myself, and I have experienced, when I have heard people's stories. They
mm,
frequently told me about how when the inner critic is at work, they tend to hold their breath.
mm.
So there is a certain level of breathlessness, if I
Yeah.
could talk about it like that. Like
Mm,
you're not at rest. You're not.
yeah.
So if there is the inner criticism part on one end,
Mm,
what is the opposite? The opposite is acceptance.
yeah.
And with acceptance comes a very free flowing breath, right?
Yes. Yes.
So because the critic, if you see what the critic is doing, is the critic is editing.
Yeah.
And that editing shows
Yeah.
in different ways in the body. So,
Absolutely.
I had met one person and he had a stutter.
Mm,
And we got talking, and he told me, I think it began because I used to think so much before speaking,
yeah.
and it became habitual because, everything becomes habitual after a point in time. Then,
Yeah.
this posture. People have actually told me about this, that, they feel a lot of weight on the shoulders, especially if,
Mm, mm,
somebody a little bent, or if
mm.
you're feeling bent, then to
Yeah.
ask your body,
Yeah.
okay, what is this bent feeling about? What am I bending under?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting too. That's really very interesting to hear. But, you know, when you look at the inner critic from the context of, say, your spirit or your emotions, or, something that often strikes me is it almost feels as if it's a program. It's like a program that's it's like a song that's playing on a loop, and not a very nice song, but it's like a program that's running on a loop. That it seems to have certain triggers, and it seems to have certain responses, which is not in the head. The thoughts come after. It's almost like a loop, right? What's your observation about this? And I mean, I'm asking you about your observation in terms of triggers and responses. And when I talk about a loop, obviously there's a cycle involved, right? So how do these triggers and these responses feed each other and create a spiral which is actually very vicious on us?
Yeah, great question again, Rekha. I would say the spiral or the loop happens because
Mm,
there are two parts to the whole the contextual journey of the inner critic.
mm,
Like, say the inner critic has been activated. I think there
yeah.
are two distinct parts. One part in my observation has been the part that conforms,
Mm,
that wants to conform to be safe, to be
yeah.
heard in the moment. So
Mm,
whether your actual wishes are being heard or not is different. But to be
mm,
just heard in the moment because
mm,
you are perhaps seeking validation from another, some
mm,
entity outside. So there
mm,
is a conforming aspect,
mm,
but with the conforming aspect, there is also its shadow, which is the non-conforming aspect.
mm,
So I think, a lot of psychologists have, done work on this, and they often describe it as an internal war, literally. And I think
mhm,
that's the loop. Like when I
mm,
hear your word loop, I also think about this internal, like
mhm,
tennis match going on between the part that is like, okay, this will keep me safe. But is
mm.
this what I want? I might not be wanting this.
Yeah, this is a very interesting observation. I mean, this is a very interesting insight that you shared, because we know that the inner critic is not a single voice. It has, I think they've just identified 7 or 8 different voices or manifestations of the inner critic, which range from guilt tripping to being a control freak to being a perfectionist to being a taskmaster to, I don't know, a couple of others that escape my mind at this point in time. Would you, I may be putting you a bit on the spot here, but would you have an example, say using any one of these, which can help us understand this a little better, in terms of the trigger and the response and this loop that's happening, just so we understand in a everyday, real life, relatable way?
I'll give you an example of what happened to me this evening before I was coming into the call. And maybe that's, I'll not take an identity, but I'll take my own example. So I've been
Okay.
wearing these clothes since morning, yeah? And whenever I appear for a meeting or a call with you, I like dressing up. So I dress up. So today I was like, it's so cold. I am not in a mood. I am not going to dress up. I'm just going to appear as I have been since morning. But
Yeah.
but there was a voice in me which said, no, but you should dress up. You
Mm,
always dress up. Why aren't you dressing up?
mm,
And I kept seeing that I was flitting between these two. An hour before our meeting actually began.
mhm,
So a part of me was like, should I do it? Should I not do it? But because I've had like an ample journey with the inner critic, now
mm.
I'm able to see it and disconnect from it a little bit and say, okay, you're there, you're speaking, but
Yeah.
I'm going to move away and do my thing. But
Yeah.
that to and fro continued for me. No, let me do it. I always do it. Why am I not doing it this time? Why am I not listening to this voice this time? I always listen. And then there was this other side, no, calm down, it's all right.
Yeah.
No. So like that. And I wish I could everyone was in the space so I could actually take people through the physical manifestation of this, which is like
Yeah.
the tough voice, the body goes into a certain space, and with the calm voice, so it's a tension, it's a line of tension.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the loop.
Yeah, you know, it makes it relatable for me too, because I do remember all through my career, and I had a pretty good career. My boss used to call me, my CEO used to call me the ninja. And he used to say that if there's a situation that's impossible, like things have to be done overnight, everybody gives up on it,
Mm,
and everybody refuses to take it up. He used to say, send her in. She would get it done. And I used to
mm,
wear this as a badge of pride. And I remember during my career, I have actually crisscrossed the city in the middle of strikes, in the middle of very, very turbulent bunds and hartals to get work done,
mm,
compromising my own physical safety. And today,
mm,
and I used to wear it as a badge of honor, saying, "Oh my God, I did this." Of course, I would be exhausted at the end of it. At the end of each assignment, I
mm,
would be completely depleted. My body would be exhausted. I would just, it would just, I'd be like a deflated balloon. But I was very proud because I did what I was supposed to be doing. I did it perfectly. I was a taskmaster. I was there. I was the ninja. Today I look back and I think, what was wrong with you? Everybody was home safe, and you were crisscrossing the city in the middle of, when the riots were happening or things like that were happening, because there was this voice inside of me which said, if you don't do it, you're a failure. That voice wouldn't let me sit back and say and just be safe or peaceful with not doing it, which is what everybody else was doing. So this makes it very relatable that we keep repeating these patterns in our everyday life, which brings me to the next question. Obviously, there is an emotional root now. So although the critics conversation is unfolding in our heads nonstop, the real roots are emotional,
mm,
right? So, what, according to you, are the primary emotional roots of our inner critic?
mm,
I'll ask you the subset to that after you.
mm. Yeah. So I think the metaphor of the loop or the circuit or the pattern that we work in is a
Mhm,
great metaphor, because I think I can chart out the emotional roots also along that metaphor.
mhm.
So see, one is shame. I think
Yeah,
the predominant root is in shame.
yeah,
When there is an idealization,
yeah,
and when someone is honoring the idealization, great, I am safe. But
yeah,
say there is always an inner impulse, no, but I don't feel like doing it. So
yeah,
what is the cost? The cost is the shame.
yeah.
If it is coming from, say, a figure of authority, which
Mm,
often it does when we are younger, right? And even when during our work life, I mean,
yeah,
there are always figures of authority in our lives,
yeah,
bosses, whoever, right? We are somebody we look up to,
yeah.
and there's this fear there.
Mm,
So along with shame comes fear,
yeah,
and then there is guilt.
yeah.
Oh, maybe I am doing this and I'm being very selfish.
Mm,
I used a very really like a flippant example of me wearing my clothes, but the inner critic is a really serious uh, identity.
Sunanda, I'm going to, since you bring up shame, I want to talk about what came to my mind as you're telling me this. And I mean, and by now everybody who listens to my live has heard even a couple of my lives know my story and my journey of having lived with abuse and having grown up in a family with abuse. And when you tell me this, what's coming to my head, right, straight off the bat, is how women stay in very toxic, abusive relationships because of shame, and because as much as there's an external pushback from society to stay in it, you also have this critic inside your head which is telling you what you should be doing. And it is so much in charge of what how you should live your life, that there's no space for any other voice out there. There's no space for your well-being out there, right?
Absolutely.
What's your
Absolutely. No, I feel you are spot on, and I in this whole network of emotions, I have mentioned shame, guilt, fear.
yeah,
And the other one that we as women are constantly told to repress, and if we show, we are made to feel like crap,
yeah,
it's anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wherever there is the inner critic,
Yeah.
whenever we are having to meet impossible standards,
Yeah.
there is anger, there will be anger.
Yes.
And without the allowance, the cultural allowance for women to show up in their angry selves, we are
Yes.
basically, cutting a part of ourselves out.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you see, this staying in abusive, toxic relationships is also a kind of taming. It's
It
a
is.
taming that society does to us.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Another example that comes to my mind, and this has been on my mind for almost a week now, is the fact that I find a lot of women who say, I believe in equality, but I'm not a feminist. And it's
Mm,
really, really funny because feminism at the end of the day is about equality. It's not about anything other than that. But the very fact that, when I hear a woman say, I'm not a feminist, when she is the recipient of all the privileges that feminism has delivered to her,
mm,
what occurs to me is your inner critic is working overtime in your head and telling you
mm.
what you can say and what you cannot say. And this is something that I don't think we even recognize sometimes how the emotions that our inner critic stirs up, this program stirs up in us, makes us come across in the world, does it?
Absolutely.
But then,
Absolutely.
like you said, if these are the roots, what
Mm.
emotions does it birth? Are these the same emotions, or are there more emotions that come into the mix as a response to the inner critic's work and its effect upon us?
Yeah. No, I think of course these four emotions are primary and they will they come to us, but I think there are various other
Mm-hmm.
emotions that we don't often, or primary, they're not primary emotions but secondary tertiary emotions that come up.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like disgust,
Yeah.
internal disgust. I've heard so
Yeah.
many, I've spoken to people, I've worked with clients. Internal disgust is high, when
Yeah.
you're trying to conform but don't want to conform but ending up conforming. What are you left feeling towards yourself? Even the anger, yeah,
You
even the
know,
anger, right? It's
that's
always, part of it is always directed towards one's own self.
You make such a valid point here because another aspect that women are always told to work on is their self-esteem and their self-confidence. We talk about the imposter syndrome, right? Now, what you're basically saying is if that anger is directed towards us and the disgust is directed towards us, what does it cost to us? What is the cost of a self-esteem pays for this?
Hmm.
This is incredible. This is incredible. So how I know now I'm going to be. I mean, we are going to be kind of walking over ground that we have covered, but just to again drive this, get this really clearly out on the table. How does the cycle now play out? We have shame, fear, whatever at the root. We have a behavior, and then we have this basket of emotions that make us continue in a circle. Can you explain the cycle as it unfolds, say with the behavior or in real life?
Yeah, so it what happens after a point is, I mean, there is no standard to the way the cycle
No.
appears for,
Yeah.
and for everybody it is different based on
Yeah.
their nurture, their nature, the context in which they are.
Yeah.
If they are, if people are fortunate and they are in a safe space, say like amongst friends, then it plays out in a certain way. If they
Yeah.
are in a very unsafe, abusive space, it plays out in a completely different way. So I don't
Mm,
think there is a standard to the way it plays out, but I
mm,
think it continues in that loop. And with
yeah.
whatever I have experienced myself and I have gathered from observations, is
Mm,
that it it goes up to a point of exhaustion, Rekha. So
yeah. Yeah.
this tennis match, if I can
Mm,
call it that,
mm,
continues up to exhaustion. And it is
mm,
that exhaustion then that makes people question,
yeah.
is this worth it?
Yes.
So I think that exhaustion or that complete, I can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
this is too much, I think that is what is the enabler in a way to break the pattern as well.
That's very interesting because, in the 40s and the 50s, we're coming across a number of women who talk about burning out, taking time out to really, because they have to heal from that burnout.
Hmm.
It's not even just a question of recognizing that this is what is causing me to burn out, but for them to also heal and recover and recoup and then come back with a better, a more enabling pattern for themselves, right? So it kind of seems like the inner critic, even for one person, our experiences with the inner, like my experience with my inner critic would be very different with of your experience with your inner critic. But even in my experience with my inner critic, I often feel there are shades and tones and nuances which is so layered and complex. Like, I think it starts off like when we started off, like when I said, there are times when my inner critic is a kind friend who's telling me, don't do this, this is for your safety. And then there is at times when it's a bully, which is saying, don't do it. Are you stupid? Are you idiotic? Are you crazy? the the language is harsh, the tonality is harsh. There are other times when it's very cold and the critic is like, yeah, go do it. You're going to fall anyway, and then when you come back, I'm going to tell you, I told you so. So there are so many layers and nuances to depending on the situation. My question is, how do we start to notice it? How do we separate this out? Because we have a voice of conscience, we have a voice of awareness, we have a voice which is also positive and enabling within us. How do we separate out the voice of an inner critic?
Great question, Rekha. I personally think, no matter what tones and nuances our inner critic comes with,
Hmm.
um, there is an obsessive quality about the inner critic.
Ah, yeah.
There is a certain level of obsessing, compulsively obsessing about things that the inner critic comes with. To this,
Hmm.
this is repetitive.
Yeah.
So I think the first step is to notice our own obsessions.
Hmm.
What do we tend to obsess about?
Hmm.
One person A could be obsessing about keeping the kitchen clean. Person B could be obsessing about, reading 20 books in a month.
Yeah.
And the voices, because the contexts are very different and the people are different, the
Yeah.
voices pushing them to those outcomes would be very
Yeah.
different. But there is an obsessive quality still.
Right. Right.
So, starting to notice our own obsessions.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, that
Okay.
would be the first step.
That's great. All right. I'm waiting for the next.
Yeah. And the next would be, I think one of the things that has really enabled my journey with my inner critic
Mm-hmm.
is the use of language.
Mm.
We all speak in, I'm not assuming that we all speak English here,
No.
but no matter what we speak,
Mm.
how does this obsession translate into our language
Mm.
and the language we use with ourselves
Mm.
and with others, and not necessarily directly with others, but when thinking about others? Say for example,
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
thinking about my mom and I'm
Mm.
thinking, how the hell is she like this? She should be thinking like this,
Yeah.
you know or how the hell is my husband like this?
Yeah.
He must be doing this, otherwise he is blah 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 blah. So
That's
this.
sorry, but that's a great point you make because when we are really hard, and this was interesting for me in a coaching session with a young woman. We were talking about a situation where she felt very angry and stressed out, and the emotions were very high. And it turned out when we explored it, what she came up with was she said, I saw somebody who looked very attractive, and I did not feel attractive. And never
Mm.
mind what I really looked like, but I didn't feel attractive. And I did not feel attractive because what was going on inside, because of what was going on and playing out within me. But the minute I looked at her, what I felt was, how dare you be this way when I cannot be this? And I think
Mm.
that's a very valid point because I've noticed this so many times with so many people, women particularly, because I think women tend to be more repressed with what they really want, with all the societal expectations and stereotypes and all of that, that I often see when they find a woman who is breaking the mold,
Mm.
there is this tendency to say, no, that's not okay.
Mm.
They call it the patriarchal bargain, where women enforce patriarchal standards upon other women because we know what's underlying underneath that. And you make a very, very important point there about how it translates into our interactions and engagement with other people. That's a fabulous point.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would just say if you can start by doing just those two things,
Mm,
notice your obsessions and notice the language you think in,
mm,
language you think about yourself in, and language you think about other people in.
yeah,
And I think slowly you will begin to see, oh no, there is a pattern here.
yeah,
The
yeah.
ought to, the must, the should be.
Mm, mm. I think also the important thing for us women, particularly, to recognize is there is no such thing as tough love. Like, we cannot use tough love as an excuse or to justify interfering with another person's journey or to judge somebody else. And I think for me, at least, that has been a huge learning that I don't have any business using this word tough love to interfere with somebody else's journey, right?
Mm.
But I think also, I would like to share, for me, something that came up in my work with my inner critic was how I felt. Like,
Mm.
every time the inner critic is around, I feel very angsty and I feel sad and I feel
Mm.
angry and I feel frustrated. I don't feel good. I don't feel
Mm.
good about myself at all. But when I do something and it comes from a space of love, it comes from the purer side of me, you
Mm.
know, I'm happy. I'm very
Mm.
joyous. I'm very, very happy. And for me, I use that as a
Mm.
to figure out who's in charge, who's in the driving seat, whose voice is this that's actually guiding me right now.
Mm.
But you know, do you think? I mean, I'm very optimistic about this, so I'm not going to say. Do you think? How
Mm.
do we transform this pattern of self-criticism into a more positive, enabling voice of support for ourselves, and obviously for ourselves and for others? How do you think we can do this?
Um, I think it's a very, very relevant question.
Mm-hmm.
And there are multiple answers, I feel, to this question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the beginning is to notice what the existing format of inner criticism is doing to you. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just extending from the obsession to the language, and I'm going to also integrate what you said because what you said is very relevant. Like,
Mm.
what are the feeling states that I'm left with?
Yeah.
And from there, figuring out, I think one thing that has really worked for me is to give space to this voice. And when
Mm.
I say space, I mean I am not also compulsively reacting to this voice.
Mm.
To notice that it exists inside me,
Mm.
but also to perhaps see that it is not all of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if there's a huge pizza, the inner critic is a slice of it.
Yes.
So if we can separate the inner critic saying that no, it's a slice of me,
Yeah.
but there are many other identities in me,
Hmm.
then what do you do with the slice?
Yeah.
You look at it, do you air it? In body work, I have done this for myself and also for a few other people. What do you do with this slice?
Yeah.
It's come out, right? But what do you do
Right.
with it? And
Right.
I think acknowledging the very fact that it exists, but only as a part of you, changes something.
Yeah.
But in its larger state, it can be very overwhelming, which is why I think this intentional separation, as I call it,
Mm.
is
Mm.
necessary. That this is not
Yeah.
all of me.
No, I think also the important thing is many of us tend to run away when the inner critic is in charge. We tend to abandon ourselves. We tend to be mindless, either to mindlessly do something or to procrastinate or to indulge in something that makes us feel good, right? And for me, I have learned that one of the ways to sit with it is to intentionally say, stop. I'm not going to binge watch Netflix. I'm not going to eat a chocolate bar. I'm not going to, go hit the gym and go berserk on all the machines, because that's not going to fix what is going on inside of me. That's not going to fix whatever it is that has triggered this feeling within me. I have to sit down with myself. I have to sit down and let it be there and feel it, and then make a decision, hear it out, and then make a decision on how to go forward with it. But I'm really very curious when you said, when this slice comes out, what do I do with it? What do we do with it, Sunanda?
So what I often do with it, Rekha, is I ask it questions.
Okay.
So one way is to be judged by the inner critic, right?
Mm,
And also to
mm,
judge it back. I think I have done it enough. And in my opinion, a lot of people I have met, they judge the inner critic back, like, you bad person. You
yeah.
know, that, like, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that if that is not there, okay, so why are you here?
Yeah.
You know, literally, like, why are you here? What do you
Yeah.
want to tell me?
Yeah.
And the other thing that recently I discovered is
Hmm.
to actually seek support from the inner critic.
That's interesting. Tell
You
us
know,
more.
like asking a question like, I understand, or saying something like, I
Mm,
understand you are here. I
mm,
understand you are trying to tell me something.
mm,
Now, can you help me out with the very basic information, knowing that I am capable of taking care of myself?
mm,
And then something shifts.
mm.
I think this internal dialoguing
Yeah.
with the inner critic, if it can change, if it can shift,
Yeah.
then I think something overall shifts.
One of the things I do with my inner critic is I'm like, okay, I've heard you out. But, and I know what you're saying, and I know it's important, and I agree with you. But what if we did this any which way? Let's see what happens. And it's an interesting negotiation, because sometimes my inner critic, I can feel that sense of, oh my God, what am I going to do with this person who's going to go do it anyway? But I also realize that one of the surest ways to flip the inner critic around is to say, I hear you, I see you, I recognize what you're telling me, but still, what if? What if we did this? And what if the outcome is great? And when that outcome is great, because the outcome always is never as bad as a inner critic tells you it is. It's almost never that. When that is the case, you tend to have a better equation with your inner critic. Like somewhere the voice just becomes a little less loud in your
Mm,
head. Right.
little
So for
less
me,
intense.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a little less intense, because it's like, okay, you were wrong last time. So what if we do it the next time? And I find that taking those little steps, despite, despite after acknowledging and listening to the voice, that helps me a lot. Uh, do you have
I,
any?
I I'm gonna just take from there and mention one thing, that the
Mm,
way I heard you and the way
mhm,
it plays out in my experience, because I resonate with what you said, and I
mhm.
think what you bring in the first time that you ask that question, right? What if we do it anyway? I think there
Yes.
is a sense of play.
Yeah, exactly. You
You know,
got that.
yeah, there's a sense of play. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to take myself so seriously.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know everything. I'm going to anyway do it, experiment, and then
Yeah.
let's see.
Absolutely. You know that you hit the nail on the head with that, because I think over time, and you've seen me over a period of 3 years, from having this really hard, draconian, I don't know, stifling relationship with my inner critic, I think now I've come to a state of playfulness where I say, okay, I hear you. So it's not really a hard voice or a stuffed voice in my head, but it's really this, it's a bit of a whiny voice, but it's also this voice which is like, okay, go do it anyway, you know? And there's like, you're right, there's a lot of fun and play. And something
Mm,
that always works for me is I tell somebody, I call up somebody, I talk to somebody, and I say, I feel scared. I feel
mm,
vulnerable. I articulate it, and somehow, it's like you're told there are boogeymen under your bed, but you switch on the light and then you feel braver.
mm.
Articulating it to somebody who's safe and having that person saying, it's okay, go do it any which way, is like putting on the light when you're scared that there is a ghost under your bed. Like that's how it works
Absolutely.
out for me. So it plays. You're right. It's a
Mm,
lot of play for me. Yeah.
mm,
So just a quick question:
mm.
is there other practices that you do every day to work with your inner critic, or to is there anything that you do or you would like to offer up as advice? I know you've given the audience a lot of advice and a lot of tips, but is there anything that you would want to add in as, say, everyday practice, which will help us get a better relationship with our inner critic and actually turn it around, recast it into a more positive, a more empowering voice of support?
So physically, I what I do, I tend to work with the body,
Mm-hmm.
and I work with the breath.
Mm.
So, say for example, in I know that in certain areas my inner critic is really, really going at me, right?
Yeah.
And I, in a situation where I'm not paying it too much attention, or I do not want to work through it intentionally, what I do is I just jump from one activity to another.
Mm-hmm.
But the more intentional way of looking at it is literally slowing down in time, not
Mm.
just mentally slowing down, but actually
Mm.
physically slowing down.
Mm.
Like, wait.
Mm.
Like today I was saying, right? Like I had this sense that I could have dressed up, I should have dressed up, all those voices were going on. So I was like,
Mm.
wait, I looked at myself in the mirror.
Mm.
What is wrong with this?
Yeah.
Then I came to my computer and I opened my, like, like a Zoom screen, a Zoom meeting
Yeah.
screen with nobody on the
Mm.
other end. I was like, okay, now tell me what is wrong with me.
Mm.
Literally, I'm giving this as an example of literally slowing down.
Yeah.
Like, even if something else is calling out to you, like you said, I think a couple of questions back,
Yeah.
to sit down with the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm feeling anxious. And inner critic also has this thing of making us feel anxious in different
Yes.
ways. It does it like, oh
Yeah.
God, am I doing the right thing? Or maybe not. Because
Yeah.
it's constantly you're having to walk that line of tension.
Yes.
So just sit
Yeah.
down with whatever feeling it is, you
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing, whether it is sadness, whether it is anger.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I would say is perhaps keep a journal with yourself. Like I want to speak to people who perhaps don't have somebody who can immediately they can talk to or call
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And call up when they need. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes we do have a lot of people, but we can't. When we exactly need, there is nobody around.
Yeah. Yeah.
So literally, then can we have a Q&A with the inner critic on paper?
Yeah.
Okay, what are you trying to tell me? And with many of us, writing down helps because
It does.
from the headspace, it
Yeah.
comes onto paper. And
Yeah.
then, many people have told me, oh, it feels like something has
Yes.
left me and gone onto the paper.
Right. Right.
So that's another way that I personally do, like, or scribble. Like, if there is a feeling, okay,
Yeah,
what can you do with the pen there? Like, is it like a
yeah,
gnawing feeling?
yeah,
To literally give it some shape and some form,
yes,
and then to maybe come back to the body and see, okay, where am I feeling it? Is it in my
right,
throat? Is it in my chest? Is it in my gut?
yeah,
So touch is very powerful, I feel, and I
yeah.
often to to remember that I am not only
I-
the inner critic. I sometimes hold myself.
Mm,
Like, there are other parts to me.
yes.
There are other very functioning parts. There are other helpful parts.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the inner critic is also the hurt part of us, actually.
Yeah,
The
that's
part that wants to edit because it has been hurt many times.
very true. Very true.
So
Very
to
true.
then, place a hand,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. There was that movie which came out a few years back. I forget its name, but it became very popular because the hero kept saying all is well, all is well. He kept telling his heart, he kept touching his heart and saying all is well. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it became such a fad for everybody to say
Yeah,
every time
I
things
don't know.
go wrong.
It sounds remotely familiar to me as well, but I can't seem to remember.
Yeah, so, but you're very right, and these are
Mm.
really great intervention, you know, tips that you have given, which if we are mindful every single day and we start practicing with the micro situations with the inner critic, not with the macro, the micro, because inner critic is there like in every aspect of our life, every moment. It's just a question of being aware of it, being aware of that voice, and then saying, what are you telling me? Are you hurt? Are you angry? Are you sad? What's going on with you? Talk to me. I think that's the way. I think it boils down to the fact as human beings, we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard. And the inner critic for me is an echo of that. The inner critic resonates with that part of me which is hurting or which is angry because it hasn't been heard or it was shamed for being who it is. And it is something we have to resolve inside of us, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
anyway, I think we've come to the end of the hour, and this has been a great, great conversation. I can see people have been weaving in and out. Although we've not had any comments, I know people have been weaving in and out, and this is a really phenomenal conversation. So thank you so much, Sunanda, for joining me again for this really fabulous topic. Thank you to
Thank you,
everybody.
Rekha, for thank you, Rekha, for having me again.
I'm always happy to, Sunanda. Thank you, everybody who's been watching in and out, weaving in and out. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We hope you have takeaways. We hope we would love to hear what you think about it. Even if you're not commenting on the live, you can write, you can send us your messages, you can comment on this video at the end of the session. I will drop in a link to the YouTube channel where the recording of this conversation is going to be made available. So you can listen to it how many other times you want. It's available at your fingertips. You can listen to it if you subscribe to the channel. All the conversations are there. You can leave a comment there. If that does not feel comfortable, feel free to message either one of us on Facebook. And we would love to hear from you. We would really, really love to hear from you. So please do. Thank you for joining us. And do remember to come back next Friday, 6:30 p.m. I have a really phenomenal coach joining us all the way from UK to talk about what purpose is. And this woman is amazing. She's super fun because she has spent a lifetime chasing purpose to understand what purpose is. So she has a very interesting journey, and I would urge everybody to come listen to it because it's a very powerful story. So thank you. Take care. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Friday.